Okay, so we saw there that many protesters showing support for Ghulam Azam, but also many of them saying that perhaps 90 years isn't enough and his age should be taken into consideration. Toby, what's your reaction to that?
Well, we were fully expecting the demonstrators, the so-called Shahbag Square demonstrators, to be calling for the death penalty.
Because they have done previously in all the other cases.
They have. One of the concerns that we have raised in relation to the Mullah trial was that because he received a sentence of life imprisonment, the demonstrators called for blood, effectively. The Prime Minister went to Parliament and said that she would speak to the judges to make sure that they understood the sentiment of the people. That resulted in a change of the law. The concern now, the Prime Minister said yesterday or even this morning that she was satisfied with the verdict. The big question would be, what if she was not satisfied with the verdict? What would have happened? Would they have changed the law? Would the government had imposed a change in the sentence? I mean, the level of the government interference in this process is staggering. 90 years for Professor Ghulam Azam, any lengthy sentence is a death sentence. He's 91 years old. He's very, very unwell. They've spoken about certain ailments, but this is not, he's not suffering from mild ailments. He's a very elderly and very unwell man. The United Nations took this particularly seriously because of the fact that he's not receiving proper medical care, and referred the matter to the UN Special Rapporteur on torture. So I don't think it's fair to say the family or the defence team should take any comfort in the fact that he's received 90 years, because it's a sentence until death.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, whether he has received the death penalty or a sentence of imprisonment, he has been convicted of 5 broad charges that make absolutely no sense in law and have not been supported by any credible evidence. And once again, the judges recognised that yesterday, but still went on to convict him. And I don't mean to go too far, but one only has to go through the judgment to really see how ridiculous this is. Yeah. That we are talking about charges where he is being held responsible for having commanded the entire Pakistani military during a 9-month conflict, when he is a religious cleric. He's not a civilian commander. He's not a military leader. He didn't have the power to stop crimes being committed, and he certainly didn't have the power to punish. And that's what he's been convicted of. The judge actually said there is no evidence to prove that he ordered any crime.
Well, so Iqbal, usually when someone of such a high caliber is put on a trial like this, which is being called a show trial, and a verdict like that is given, we hear so much condemnation from the international community, but we haven't had that with Professor Ghulam Azam, have we? Well,
I mean, it's only yesterday that the verdict has been announced. We must also sort of look at the surrounding circumstances in the world, events taking place. I mean, huge crisis in Egypt, huge crisis in Syria, in Iraq, there are huge problems into it. Now, all these, of course, news seem to be clouding the major news that is coming through. But I think we have had statements coming up from both the political and the religious leaders around the world, and not only from the Muslim countries, but they've been outside the Muslim countries. Our UK government has also expressed a huge concern in terms of impartiality, the need for transparency, to ensure that the international jurists are also allowed to look at when it's been conducted. But I think when the news filters through, not only in the Muslim countries around the world, but primarily in Bangladesh, this is a huge area of concern. We have seen the scale of sort of rioting and strikes and counter-strikes taking place. And there's a loss of life from both sides that's going to take place. And in fact, I did raise this issue with the Foreign Minister, Deepa Moni, when I spoke to her a few months ago on this particular matter, and really as an independent person, but who is very much concerned about the stability and the welfare of Bangladesh, to ensure that, the whole issue of transparency, and she had assured that will take place in all its way.
But putting aside the instability and the protesters on the streets, not that that's not a concern, but putting that aside, what does this mean for sort of the ulama of the world, the Islamic scholars? What does it mean when an Islamist leader like that is put on trial for political charges when he's actually a religious leader?
That's right. Well, I mean, there's a very dangerous trend that we see now sort of coming up. And this is a worrying sign because, yes, they are religious leaders. They do make statements in terms of what is right for the country, in issues of justice. And if you just look at the background of Professor Ghulam Azam, I mean, he's got an impeccable record in terms of issues of discrimination. He has come out very much open. In fact, I recall way back during the presidential election in Pakistan when Fatima Ali Jinnah was a presidential candidate, and he supported her in terms of the equality right of it. If you look at the issues of extremism and terrorism, these are the leaders who can really make the difference on the ground. And if these people are silenced or punished for crime that has not been committed, I mean, what is there to say for the future? I mean, we are living in a very unstable world.
Well, not that religious leaders can't commit crimes, because they may have committed those crimes.
Very much so. But the due process has to take place. I mean, there's no question about it. I entirely agree. And we have some of the so-called religious figures who do. I mean, we see the bombing taking place, suicides being committed, and incitement to religious hatred. And the due process of law must take place. But these are the elements who has record, whose background is so prevalent, so known, so clearly known. And yet, if this is the route they are being followed through, then it's a very dangerous sign, because people no longer are prepared to sit and observe what is really happening. When the issue of injustice takes place at that level, then the people do react. And this is the worry, how they react. And sadly, at the moment, if there's no other proper course of going through the proper channels, of expressing through the court or whatever, then they take the law into their own hands, and it becomes very dangerous.
Toby, you're particularly concerned with the lack of the international focus on this. What can they do as an international? What can international community leaders do? And also, what have you been doing to sort of raise awareness of this?
Sure. Well, it's very difficult to keep banging the same drum, and I think I've been banging the same drum now for close to 3 years, warning the international community how dangerous this is and what could follow. I don't like to focus on the fact that this is a religious, spiritual leader, so what is happening to him is so much more egregious. This shouldn't happen to any man, irrespective of what his personal, political or religious beliefs are. But because we are talking about a religious party in Bangladesh, a very volatile country, it does have significance. It does have far-reaching significance and consequences to the region. And so we have been banging this drum that, of course, there should be a trial. These people, if it is determined that there is sufficient evidence to put them on trial, they should be put on trial through a correct process with full respect for due process. That's what we have been saying. We obviously, I can't divulge precisely who I've spoken to, but broadly speaking, we have raised this with the various different agencies of the United Nations, of the British government, of the US government, and the European Union, and also the Commonwealth. And many of these institutions have voiced concerns, either privately and diplomatically to the government of Bangladesh, but we've also raised this with institutions and countries in the Middle East and the Gulf states in order to raise this as a real concern with the government of Bangladesh, because this affects far more than a handful of individuals.
So are we likely to see anything coming out of this? Raising it is one thing, but are people actually going to do anything about it?
Sure, and I think that to suggest that this is covered up and it doesn't receive sufficient media attention because of other crises around the world, I mean, there's some truth in that. But you've only got to look at the main reputable broadsheets in the last 24 hours. And this has received significant press, some of it positive, some of it negative, but it has received a great deal of attention. We've seen this hitting the front page of BBC News online. We've seen this as main stories on Al Jazeera, and this is not just restricted to Bengali media anymore. This is becoming an issue. Of course, policymakers pay attention to what is in the media because it has a huge impact. And so I would assume, and I would certainly hope, that there will be a much greater response. And the only other thing that I would add is that we know that just a couple of weeks ago, the all-party parliamentary group on human rights, headed by, or in a process headed by Lords Avebury and Lord Carlisle, wrote to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, raising these concerns, very serious concerns, requesting a response.
Okay, if I can just bring Sir Iqbal in, because we're running out of time. Is it likely that we'll see, do you think, from the international community a little bit more noises from them? Perhaps we can
I
hear.
think it is absolutely, it is pivotal. This information comes out. We need to send a very powerful message across that these sort of areas of deficiencies in the processes cannot be accepted. And when we are dealing with human life and the way it's being dealt with and what can come to, not just for that individual person, but for the whole country, it is hugely detrimental. And we see serious consequences in front of us. Let's avoid it. I hope and pray that sense prevails and that they need to look at the way the legal process, the appeal process is taking place and ensure justice is done in the manner it should be done.
Well, I don't know about you, gentlemen, but I could have sat here and spoken about this for another hour, but that's all we have time for this evening. I want to thank my guests, Sir Iqbal Sacranie and Toby Cadman, for joining us in the studio, and thank you at home for watching. Remember, you can keep up with our Twitter conversation on Bangladesh using the hashtag #BangladeshInCrisis, and you can view previous episodes of our series by visiting our YouTube channel. For now, from all of us here, Assalamu alaikum.